Ibrahim Traore stood before the towering gates of the presidential palace. His heart weighed with a responsibility far greater than any he had ever known. The palace, a grand edifice of stone and history, had long symbolized power, authority, and the weight of governance. Yet as Ibrahim looked up at the majestic structure, he could not help but feel a pang of unease. This was not the place for him, not anymore. The sun had just begun to dip below the horizon, casting long golden shadows across the lush gardens that surrounded the palace. In this quiet moment, when the world seemed to pause, Ibrahim found himself questioning everything that had led him here. He had risen through the ranks of military service, his journey one of blood, sacrifice, and endless struggle. But in the wake of it all, he had become a leader, a man who wielded power without truly understanding its impact. His mother's voice echoed in his mind, a voice that had guided him in the darkest of times. She had always spoken of the forgotten, the children who had no homes, the orphans left to fend for themselves in a world that had no place for them. She had dreamed of a better world, one where every child could know love and safety. But that dream had died with her, lost amidst the chaos of war and politics. And now, as the newly appointed president of Burkina Faso, Ibrahim stood at the crossroads of his destiny, staring up at the palace that had been entrusted to him. The weight of his office was heavy, but it was nothing compared to the weight of his conscience. How could he rule this nation when his own heart ached with the memory of his mother's unfulfilled dream? It was then that he saw him, a boy, no older than 10, standing just beyond the palace gates. The child's appearance was unremarkable at first glance. His clothes were ragged, his face dirty and worn from a life lived in the streets. But there was something in his eyes, something that Ibrahim could not quite place, that drew him in. The boy stood there silently watching Ibrahim, as if he had been waiting for this moment his entire life. Ibrahim, perplexed, approached him, unsure of what to say or do. "I'm sorry. Do I know you?" Ibrahim asked, his voice steady yet laced with a curiosity he couldn't suppress. The boy did not answer right away. Instead, he took a step closer, his eyes never leaving Ibrahim's face. Then, as if on cue, he held up a small, faded photograph, the edges curled and frayed from years of handling. Ibrahim's heart skipped a beat as he recognized the image. The photo was of a woman and a child, a mother and her son. It was a picture Ibrahim had not seen in years, his mother smiling, with him as a young boy standing beside her. The boy's voice broke through Ibrahim's shock. "She's your mother, isn't she?" he asked, his words soft but charged with meaning. "The one who used to dream of making the world a better place before it all fell apart." Ibrahim's hand trembled as he took the photograph. The memories flooded back in a rush. His mother's kindness, her unwavering belief in a world that could be healed by love. She had always said that the true measure of a leader was not how much power they held, but how much love they could give. And now, standing before this boy, this messenger of fate, Ibrahim felt the weight of her absence like never before. His voice cracked as he asked, "Where did you find this?" The boy's eyes glimmered with a sadness that seemed far beyond his years. "I didn't find it," he said softly. "I was told to bring it to you." The boy's words were like a spark to dry tinder. Ibrahim's heart raced. This boy, this stranger, had brought him the key to something he had long buried deep inside. His mother's legacy, the hope she had carried even in the face of insurmountable odds. And now, that hope was standing before him, demanding to be acknowledged. For days, Ibrahim could not shake the boy's words. The image of his mother, her dream, and the boy's quiet insistence that he was the one to fulfill it, haunted him. He knew that the walls of the presidential palace, though grand and imposing, could no longer serve as mere symbols of power. They had to become something more. His mother had wanted a place of refuge for the lost, for the abandoned, for those whose lives had been torn apart by the chaos of war and politics. And Ibrahim now more than ever understood that this was his duty, his calling. And so Ibrahim made a decision that would change the course of history. He would transform the very heart of his nation, the presidential palace itself, into a sanctuary. It would no longer be a place for grand speeches and meetings of state. It would be a home for the forgotten children of Burkina Faso, a place where they could find love, safety, and hope for a better future. The transformation was not immediate. It took weeks of planning, of reimagining what the palace could be. Workers and volunteers, many of whom had come from the streets themselves, gathered in secret to help. They painted walls with bright colors, turned empty rooms into classrooms and play areas, and transformed the sprawling gardens into a safe haven for the children. It was a labor of love, one that required sacrifice and dedication. As the first children began to arrive, Ibrahim stood at the entrance of the palace, watching them as they stepped across the threshold. They were frightened, wary of the unfamiliar surroundings. Some had been abandoned, some orphaned by war, but all had known suffering. Yet as they entered the palace, something began to change in their eyes. The walls, once cold and impersonal, began to hum with life. They were no longer just stone and mortar. They were now a sanctuary. Over time, the children began to heal. They played in the gardens, their laughter ringing out like a symphony. They attended school in the palace's newly built classrooms, their minds expanding with each lesson. They slept in rooms filled with warmth and comfort, a far cry from the cold streets they had once called home. Ibrahim watched them with pride, but he also watched them with something deeper. He watched them with the eyes of a man who had rediscovered the true meaning of leadership. The palace had become a place of miracles. Children who had once been lost and forgotten were now thriving. They were learning, growing, and becoming the leaders of tomorrow. Ibrahim had done what no one thought possible. He had turned the seat of power into a home for the homeless, a place of love and care for those who had never known such things. The world took notice. News outlets from across the globe reported on the transformation, marveling at the unprecedented act of kindness and compassion. Political leaders from around the world visited, some skeptical, others in awe, but all left with the same conclusion. What Ibrahim Traore had done was nothing short of revolutionary. But Ibrahim did not care for their praise. The only affirmation he needed was the joy he saw in the eyes of the children. They had become his family, and he had become their father. As the years passed, Ibrahim continued to lead with love. The presidential palace, once a symbol of cold authority, had become a symbol of hope. It was a place where children learned to dream, to hope, and to become the change they wished to see in the world. And for Ibrahim, there was no greater achievement. The boy who had brought him his mother's photograph would return from time to time, always with new children, always with new hope. Each time, Ibrahim would greet him with a smile, knowing that this was the boy who had ignited the spark that had set the world on fire. And as Ibrahim stood in the garden, watching the children play, he realized that his mother's dream had finally come true. It was not just a dream anymore. It was a living, breathing reality, a reality that would continue to grow and flourish for generations to come. Call to action. If this story touched your heart, consider subscribing for more. Inspiring tales of hope, healing, and unexpected kindness. Hit the like button and share this with someone who needs it today.